about the scam that ended tragically for her mother, a CBS News investigation, and how a popular Caribbean destination is making sharks their ally to protect marine life on the CBS Evening News.
Do you remember being stabbed in the eye?
Salman Rushdie sits down with Anderson Cooper for his first television interview after he was almost killed by a knife-wielding attacker.
So my first thought when I saw this murderous shape rushing towards me was, so it's you.
Now I have the nomination, and this is what they try and take me off the trail for.
It is the president's signature, making sure Congress does its job, that these materials will be in transit by the end of the week.
I will put tens of thousands of young people to work at the forefront of our climate resilience and energy future, clean energy future.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to a very special edition of America Decides. Tonight marks our expansion to a full hour every Monday through Thursday right here on CBS News 24/7. So thank you very much for being with us. And let's get right to the news and a historic day in Manhattan. Lawyers presented their opening statements, and the first witness, former National Enquirer publisher David Pecker, took to the stand in Donald Trump's criminal trial. The former president and the Republican Party's presumptive nominee is staying on message that the case is a distraction from his campaign.
It's very unfair what's going on, and I should be allowed to campaign. And whoever heard of this, you get indicted for that? People in the court just said to me, I can't believe it. This is the case.
Trump is accused of falsifying business records to cover up a payment during his 2016 presidential campaign to adult film star Stormy Daniels. The prosecution says this was part of a scheme to corrupt the 2016 election. And moving over to Capitol Hill, Speaker Mike Johnson bet the House over the weekend. He defied a chunk of his party to pass a foreign aid package, including funding for Ukraine. That could spell trouble for Johnson's future as Speaker, as the legislation now heads to the Democratic-controlled Senate. Bob Costa and Nicole Killian are following all of these developments for us, but we'll begin with Bob, who is outside the courthouse in Lower Manhattan. Bob, that's become your home now as you cover this trial. But this was a big day. Opening statements in the first criminal trial of a former president. What exactly did each side say in their opening statements?
They outlined the whole scope of this investigation and ultimately this prosecution and the trial that began today. For the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, this was a key moment in his career, outlining the case against a former president of the United States, alleging that he committed felony crimes, that he was participant in a scheme to cover and kill, catch and kill, they call it. Tough stories about Trump and his alleged misconduct during the 2015-2016 period, and using Michael Cohen, Trump's longtime lawyer, as a means of paying off people like Stormy Daniels, the adult film star, so those stories didn't come to light at a critical moment in the 2016 election. Trump is falsely saying this is election interference and something that's being stirred by President Biden and his Justice Department. But what's evident here today is this is very real, and Trump is being accused of allegedly committing crimes that really affected, in the eyes of the prosecution, how the election played out in 2016.
And in part of making that case, prosecutors called their first witness to the stand, David Pecker. He's the former publisher of the National Enquirer. How important is his testimony to this case?
It's very important, and that's part of why the prosecution decided to call David Pecker first. What they're doing here is trying to counter the defense's argument that Trump was just paying Cohen his legal fees. Cohen, Trump's longtime lawyer, and what the defense argued today through the Trump lawyer Todd Blanche is that Trump ultimately wasn't really a participant in any scheme. All he was doing was paying his lawyer, Michael Cohen. The prosecution is saying that's not true. Yes, Trump might have called it legal fees when he made his payment to Cohen, but he knowingly was a participant in a scheme to cover up payments to Stormy Daniels with the intent of blocking any kind of coverage of his alleged sexual encounter with Stormy Daniels years ago. Trump denies all wrongdoing, denies all kinds of encounters that are alleged in this case. That must be noted as well. But you have a framing here from the defense and from the prosecution today that we are going to hear more and more about as this trial unfolds. And David Pecker was called by the prosecution today clearly because he is part of the origin story of how these payments got made ultimately in October of 2016.
And Bob, there are no cameras allowed in the courtroom, so the public's view of this trial comes through reporting like yours, sketches from the courtroom artists. But, you've been in the room. You can kind of tell us what it's like in there. Is it possible to describe Trump's demeanor in the courtroom, especially during those opening statements from Pecker?
This is a scene that's unlike anything in American politics. We use the term unprecedented a lot, but this is certainly unprecedented in American political history to have a general election campaign season playing out with a candidate like Donald Trump having to sit in a courtroom, not because he wants to sit in the courtroom, but because he's mandated by the prosecution to be there, a criminal defendant in a high-stakes trial. Trump clearly frustrated, and he's raging on social media. He's oftentimes complaining to reporters in the hallway, but inside the courtroom, it's clear that Trump is relatively muted, even at times dipping his head, closing his eyes, not saying much. He's not muttering. He's not fidgeting as much as I've seen Trump in previous trials here in New York. I've sat behind him in the courtroom at previous legal issues he's faced, and he's always been a little bit more electric in those settings. But Trump is facing a gag order here. He's not allowed to speak out. And he knows that the judge, Juan Merchan, in this case, is watching Trump very closely. He can't speak about witnesses. He can't speak about the jurors.
And just the first day of this trial. Bob Costa, thank you very much for being there for us in Lower Manhattan. We appreciate it. And moving over to Capitol Hill, the Senate is expected to vote tomorrow on foreign aid bills that passed the House over the weekend. The lower chamber approved billions of dollars in aid for Ukraine, Israel, and allies in the Indo-Pacific. But the move could cost Speaker Mike Johnson his job. Georgia Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene says she'll move forward with triggering a vote to remove him if he doesn't resign. Well, Nicole Killian joins us now from Capitol Hill on all of this. So, Nicole, let's start with these House foreign aid bills that passed the House. Do they face any opposition in the Senate? What's the future here?
Yeah, well, we don't expect too much opposition. I mean, you're going to have, as we traditionally see with many significant pieces of legislation, some senators may try to offer up amendments, but that is unlikely to interfere writ large with this larger process. And keep in mind that both the House and Senate are out this week. So I noted earlier that, this is kind of like when you have to go into work on your off day. This is basically what the Senate is having to do. So this is going to be a pretty quick process. And let's not forget, this is actually pretty much the same components of the bill that the Senate already passed in terms of that funding for Israel, Ukraine, the Indo-Pacific. So, the House broke that bill apart and is sending it back in a bundle. So in essence, the Senate is just voting on legislation that they have already approved. Now, the one big difference, of course, is that fourth catch-all bill that the House initiated, which does include a number of national security priorities, from sanctions against Iran to providing that this Ukraine aid is paid back in a loan, to also including a ban on TikTok. So there's kind of a potpourri of sorts in this fourth package. And I would say the future of that one may be a little up in the air from the standpoint of, there were more differences here in the Senate over TikTok legislation and how to proceed. But it's possible this time around there may be support. That's still an unknown, but we'll have to see, Caitlin.
Yeah, I mean, Nicole, it was really fascinating to watch Johnson maneuver around the spending bill and eventually supporting it through to get passed. What is he saying about this effort from those in his party that want to kick him out?
Well, he's largely tried to keep his head down and get this legislation across the finish line. I mean, at the end of the day, that is his job as Speaker, to kind of shepherd these major pieces of legislation, whether that was government funding, whether that was this foreign aid package. And while, again, as a rank and file member, these may be pieces of legislation he may not necessarily support. As Speaker, he has that larger responsibility of trying to move the process along. And so in doing so, of course, that has frustrated many of his members who feel that he has kind of departed from some of those core Republican ideals when it comes to fiscal responsibility and when it comes to this foreign aid package. You know, many members feel like the border, U.S.-Mexico border, should have been dealt with first. Now, they did put forth a border security package that ultimately failed as part of this broader foreign aid package that was recently passed. But, you know, those are some of the brewing frustrations among members like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Paul Gosar and Tom Massey, who have all joined in this potential motion to vacate against the Speaker.
And Nicole, I want to play a little bit of sound from Tom Cole. He's the chair of the Appropriations Committee. He had this to say on Face the Nation about the possibility of Johnson being removed. Let's take a listen.
I take anything seriously, but no, I don't. Look, I think it's a relatively small number of Republican members, frankly, just as it was in McCarthy's case. There were only 8 people.
Exactly.
But the point is, I don't think there's unified Democratic support. There was unified Democratic support to remove the Speaker. I think both sides have now seen how dangerous this is, how irresponsible it is. And quite frankly, I think it's unlikely that Democrats who supported Ukraine, not as many supported Israel as we would have liked, but they did support Ukraine. I think they're unlikely to remove the Speaker over that.
So, Nicole, I'm really curious about that dynamic. I mean, how much appetite is there among House Democrats for Johnson to lose his job?
Well, I think it depends who you talk to. There are members like Congressman Cole there who said that there doesn't seem to be that desire necessarily on the part of many Republicans to necessarily move forward. He thinks it's a small group. Many still have, you know, heartache from that 3-week period when McCarthy was ousted. So the short answer is, Caitlin, we will have to see. But for now, Congresswoman Greene not necessarily dropping her threat against the Speaker.
All right, we shall see. Famous last words. Nicole Killian, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And helping keep the Biden campaign on message.
We love our country, and we understand then what is at stake in terms of foundational, fundamental principles.
We take a closer look at the issues this election year ahead with Communications Director for the President's re-election campaign. You're streaming America Decides.
Mr. President, there's a lot to talk about.
A lot to talk about.
Does this carrier strike group stand ready?
It's just incredible to see there's an active search and rescue operation going on 12 hours after this accident.
The CBS Evening News with Nora O'Donnell.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I use sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
Oh, that's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That Desired Farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois that don't need to be living there?
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
With the presidential vote less than 7 months away, President Biden was on the campaign trail in Virginia for an Earth Day event. Meanwhile, Donald Trump spent the day inside a Manhattan courtroom. The former president's legal woes are helping to shape a campaign unlike anything we've seen before. Joining us now from Wilmington, Delaware, is Michael Tyler. He's the communications director for the Biden campaign. Michael, thank you very much for being here. Good to see you. So how is the Biden campaign assessing all of this? What's the strategy when it comes to this trial?
Well, listen, as it relates to Donald Trump's trial, those are questions that he and his legal team are going to have to answer. What this campaign and this president are going to be focused on in the meantime is communicating directly with the voters who are going to decide this election. That's what you saw last week when the president spent 3 days campaigning through Pennsylvania and Scranton, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. And it's what you'll see today, of course, on Earth Day in Virginia, and again tomorrow when he goes down to Florida to campaign on an issue that is going to be fundamental to this election, which is whether or not women are going to have the fundamental rights to make their own decisions for their bodies. We think that stands in stark contrast to Donald Trump, who's a candidate who, when he is out on the stump, is proudly bragging about the role that he played in overturning Roe and is saying that the extreme bans that we're seeing in states like Florida and Arizona are the right thing to do. We think that's wrong, and we're going to campaign on that from now through Election Day.
Yeah, I want to ask a little bit more about that. As you say, I mean, the Biden administration announced new rules that are offering, more robust legal protections for patients seeking abortions and for healthcare workers providing them. And of course, Biden's also expected to go to Florida tomorrow to discuss the issue. But I'm curious, do you think that this issue puts any state in play that otherwise may not have been competitive?
Well, listen, we think this issue is going to be fundamental to this election across the country. And we think, as you mentioned, the president going to Florida tomorrow to campaign on this issue. We've talked about Florida being in play in recent weeks. That's why the president is going there. That's why we got staff on the ground. It's why we're running ads in states like Florida. It's also true in states that we've been talking about since the start of this campaign, like Arizona, where you have a ballot initiative in the state and where the campaign is already aggressively working to turn out the vote and make sure that voters understand that this election is going to be a choice between President Biden and Kamala Harris, who are fighting every single day to restore the protections of Roe, to make sure that women can make their own fundamental decisions about their bodies. And again, Donald Trump, a man who is bragging about his role that he played in overturning Roe v. Wade, who appointed the justices who overturned Roe v. Wade, and again, who said women should be punished for receiving abortion care. So yes, it's going to matter in states like Florida and states like Arizona, but frankly, it's going to matter in every single state across this country, because if Donald Trump returns to power, he's made it very clear that he's going to do whatever he can to ban abortion across the country with or without Congress. So if you're in a blue state, a red state, a purple state, this issue is going to be on the ballot.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether these ballot measures drive voters at the top of the ticket as well. Switching gears a little bit, I mean, today is Earth Day. The president announced several new climate actions. But what's really interesting is that in our CBS News poll that's out today, 50% of respondents said that they either have not read or heard much about not much or nothing at all about what the administration has been doing to reduce climate change. So why this disconnect? I mean, what went wrong here?
Well, listen, this is exactly what a campaign is for. It's about us relentlessly telling our message of what this president has accomplished and what he intends to do with another 4 years in office. And so we're taking opportunities like today on Earth Day, but every day on the stump, you'll see the president campaign on this, and you'll see it reflected in our paid advertisements. Everything that this president has done to tackle what is an existential threat to the United States of America and to the globe worldwide. That's why the president made the single largest investment in combating climate change through the Inflation Reduction Act, which not only takes on climate change, but makes sure that as we're building the economy for the future, that's an American economy, American green jobs that is making sure that we tackle this problem. And so this is going to be something that we relentlessly focus on and communicate to the Biden-Harris coalition, young voters, progressive voters across the country, so they understand when they go to the ballot box, there's a choice between Joe Biden, who made the single largest investment to tackle climate change, and a guy like Donald Trump, who's making clear that the only thing that he's going to do if he gets another term in office is give more tax breaks and handouts to big oil and gas execs.
Yeah, I want to talk about young voters because obviously they're critical to Biden's reelection. In our polling, we saw a significant dip, among young voters. Biden's approval rating had dropped 12 points since February, according to our polling. And his approval among these voters also dipped when it comes to his handling of the Israel-Hamas war. So can Biden win with those numbers?
Well, look, absolutely, because we're going to continue to campaign relentlessly to reach young voters. Young voters were a key element of the Biden-Harris coalition in 2020. They were a key component for Democratic successes in the midterms when Democrats had the most successful midterm cycle for an incumbent president since FDR. They're going to be critical to our work in 2024. So we're going to make clear everything that this president has done for young folks, from climate, as we talked about, to the work that we've done to tackle the student debt crisis in this country, forgiving nearly $150 billion in student loan debt for over 4 million borrowers in this country, to the work that we're doing to make sure that women have the fundamental right to make their own decisions. The whole slate of issues that we're bringing to bear at the ballot box this November, frankly, nobody has more at stake than young people, and we're going to present the contrast and the choice and the vision of Joe Biden against Donald Trump. And we're very confident that if we do that relentlessly for the next 6 months, that young folks are going to be with Joe Biden again this November.
All right, 6 months to go. We shall see. Michael Tyler, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And classes were held virtually today at Columbia University as students and demonstrators flooded the area to protest Israel's operations in Gaza. The rise in anti-Semitic rhetoric is causing safety concerns on campus and across the city. One of the university's prominent rabbis urged students to go home as a precautionary measure. Here was New York City Mayor Eric Adams on CBS News 24/7 this afternoon.
The right to protest is a part of the American way of life. And I protested as a young man during the South Africa, calling for the dismantle of apartheid. So I know what it is to protest. But if you look at those protests, you will see that there was no call spewing out the destruction of any particular group. There was no calls for violence. There was no celebrating terrorist organizations like Hamas. That is what is bringing about a level of concern that you are witnessing.
The NYPD is ramping up its presence near campus and around the city for the first night of Passover. And we're used to red and blue on this show, but how about green? Today is Earth Day, so we are taking a closer look at which voters care about climate change and why. You're streaming America Decides.
On our places, bright shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else.
This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original. 48 hours. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
Or you can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to America Decides. A new CBS poll finds a large majority of the public are in favor of the U.S. taking steps to address the issue of climate change. CBS News Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now for a recurring segment with our CBS News Data Desk to analyze what our polling means and what it means for the presidential race. Anthony, good to see you.
How are you, Caitlin?
So let's talk about this new polling in honor of Earth Day. Who exactly is in favor of this and who isn't?
Well, here's that number you mentioned at the top. It's that big 70% who say, yes, the U.S. should be taking steps to address this. But let me show you this. The number of people who say that it is very important to address climate change, quite frankly, it does not rank near things like the economy and inflation on the issues list. But when you drill down and look at, well, who does say that it's very important, take a look at this because it speaks to the politics here. It's people who voted for Joe Biden, much more likely to say it's very important. It's Democrats in general, and it's younger people. All of these are key parts of Joe Biden's coalition. So that underpins not just the messaging that he may have to do in the campaign, but also a key constituency. And I'm going to add this because, yes, we get partisan splits. I mentioned the Democrats. Yes, the Republicans are divided on favoring the U.S. taking these steps. But let me go back to that young people thing for a minute. Take a look at this. Younger Republicans are more likely to favor the U.S. taking steps. So it's not just straight partisanship. A lot of age, a lot of young voters in there, and that sets up a really interesting dynamic for the campaign on this issue, Caitlin.
Yeah, more of a generational divide than a political one. That's fascinating. I mean, the administration has been pressing this idea that new energy is good for the economy. But do voters necessarily agree with that?
This may be the most important part of all this, right? Look at this split on whether efforts to reduce climate change will help or hurt the economy. This is very closely divided between help and hurt. And what's important here is that there's been for years, for decades, an argument, whether it's climate change, whether it's the environment, of whether or not people could afford to take steps to help. And we've often seen that people who say it will hurt them financially, even if they think it's important, don't immediately support these steps. And in fact, we see that right now. Take a look at the price of gasoline. If you say that the price of gas has lately been hard or difficult for you financially, you are much more likely to think that efforts to fight climate change are going to hurt your finances than if the price of gasoline doesn't impact you. So it becomes a pocketbook issue, and that underpins that key point in the argument about what all this means, Caitlin.
Yeah, and Anthony, related to that, electric vehicles, of course, have been a big point of contention for this administration. How are voters feeling about that? What are you hearing?
That is where the rubber meets the road for a lot of people. Look, it's very divided. When people don't think that the U.S. should be prioritizing that, yeah, they think it'll hurt the economy and jobs, like I was talking about. They also don't like the idea of the government that they believe forcing you to buy something that you don't want.
Yes, a tale as old as time on that one. Anthony Salvanto, thank you very much. That's fascinating.
Thank you.
And demonstrations against the war in Gaza continue to roil college campuses across America. We'll take a closer look at the growing unease at the country's universities. You're streaming America Decides.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going.
The clock, it's ticking. Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
It can help us with medical discovery, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Welcome back to America Decides. President Biden is condemning anti-Semitism in the U.S. as protests against the Israel-Hamas war break out at universities across the nation. In the president's Passover message, he said Anti-Semitism, quote, has absolutely no place on college campuses. He also pledged to continue to aggressively counter harassment and violence against Jewish people through his administration's national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. Nancy Cordes has more on this from the White House. Hi, Nancy. Good to see you. So how is the White House approaching these protests that are breaking out on college campuses?
Very carefully, Caitlin. In fact, just this afternoon, the president was giving a speech on the environment and Earth Day in Virginia. And afterwards, reporters asked him a couple of questions, and they asked him for his response to these anti-Semitic protests that have broken out on college campuses. And he had a very nuanced response. He said that he condemns any protests that are anti-Semitic, but that he also condemns those who don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians. So an acknowledgement, it would seem, that not all pro-Palestinian protests are tinged with anti-Semitism, and that this is a legitimate concern that many Americans and many progressives in particular have about the welfare of the Palestinian people. And so I think that that response gives you a sense of how the White House is trying to thread this needle, knowing that there has been an uptick in anti-Semitic threats, in anti-Semitic violence, and yet at the same time acknowledging that there is a very real concern about the plight of the Palestinian people that is shared, by the way, by many in this White House.
Yeah, and Nancy, I want to talk a little bit about the politics of all of that, because this is also a president obviously headed into his re-election. We saw in our own polling that its approval rating among young voters, particularly on the issue of the administration's handling of the Israel-Hamas war, has dipped significantly. How might this impact younger voters in particular? How is this administration kind of grappling with that idea?
It's a major concern. You know, his handling overall of the war in Israel over the past 6 months has fallen from a 44% approval rating to 33%. You have to assume that's probably even lower for young people who are particularly vocal, and they're also obviously a key part of his coalition. Interestingly, the president was at this Earth Day event today with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the New York Congresswoman, who has been not only outspoken when it comes to the environment, but also when it comes to the plight of the Palestinian people. And during his remarks, the president said something interesting. He praised AOC, and he said, "I learned a long time ago, listen to that lady, and we're going to talk more about another part of the world." So he seemed to be suggesting that not only was he going to talk to her about the environment, but that he was going to talk to her about Gaza as well. And we saw the two of them, along with Bernie Sanders, coming back from that event here at the White House and entering the Oval Office. So perhaps that conversation took place right after the event.
Fascinating spotting. Nancy Cordes, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And for more on this, let's bring in our panel, Dave Weigel and Deepa Shivram. Dave is national political reporter for Semaphore, and Deepa is White House correspondent for NPR. Guys, thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it. Let's talk about kind of the political pressures facing Biden involving this. I mean, it was really interesting what Nancy said there. And of course, we've seen this through the primaries, the pressure that we've seen through voters. But Deepa, I'm curious how the White House is kind of handling this, how they should be handling this, what they should be concerned about.
I mean, I think we can just start with any time the president goes out on the road, right? It could be somewhere as close as Virginia. It could be Florida, where he's going tomorrow. It could be North Carolina. I have been on the road with him for months now since he kicked off this re-election campaign. There are protesters who are protesting the president's stance on Israel, the United States' aid to Israel, and calling the president Genocide Joe. It is everywhere you go in this country, and it follows the president everywhere he goes. Even, I remember one time in Texas, we were woken up at like 5 in the morning by protesters. So this is something that is constantly present for the president, for this White House. And in his remarks today, I mean, you can see that he's trying to toe this line and sort of have it both ways. But at the end of the day, I mean, you look at those poll numbers, especially among younger voters who have been very vocal about this issue consistently since October 7th. This is something that they are still trying to figure out. And there isn't exactly a right answer here. here, but you look at Joe Biden's history with Israel. I mean, he has called himself a Zionist. This is something that he feels personally very strongly about. And you're seeing them sort of try to grapple, what the president believes is the right thing to do with what voters are really looking for here.
Yeah. What about that tension, Dave?
Well, one other piece of tension here, it was the Earth Day event. We haven't talked that much about Earth Day. He was there at the event partly to announce this thing, the Climate Conservation Corps. There was a huge AOC Green New Deal priority. It was a Sunrise Movement priority. I was at a protest the Sunrise Movement did at outside the White House a couple of years ago, demanding this, and they got it. And that part of the base does not care. The Sunrise Movement has moved on to Palestinian rights activism, Gaza activism. So it is. All the polling you showed is what we have seen on the trail among not just younger Democrats but all Democrats. Support for the war in Israel is plummeting, and Gallup's polling it's in the 30s. And I think Joe Biden's age is a factor here. For younger Democrats, I'd say Democrats under age 60 even, they don't remember a time when Israel was really under threat. Where Israel now would there be terrorism in Israel? Yes, but not a situation like 1973 where Israel could be wiped off the map. And the attempt to get Democrats all thinking that way, the way Joe Biden thinks, it's not working. Younger Democrats have seen Israel as the aggressor. He cannot, with a speech or with a couple of statements, he cannot square that. He needs Israel to do what it's done other conflicts and back off and not continue the invasion. It's not really up to anything he can say domestically. It's about the situation in the country.
Yeah, and Deepa, I mean, I'm curious too, because the administration will likely have to make the argument, okay, well, however upset you are with us, here's the alternative on the other side. I mean, how does that resonate?
And they're trying and they're trying and they're trying. And I think you hear White House officials and campaign officials say, not everyone's paying attention yet, right? We still have 6 months to go. People are going to clock in later this year. They've already seen these two candidates face off in 2020. Like, it's going to be a more delayed kind of engagement point with this election. But it's hard to be pointing at Trump when there are so many people who are concerned about these issues. One thing I think is really interesting that they're trying to do is they recognize that young people are very fired up about this. And so they're trying to talk about other issues that young people are fired up about, climate change being one of them, gun control being one of them, and try to focus and say, I know you're not really happy about this, but, here are these things that we are doing that if Trump were to be reelected, or Trump to be elected again, would kind of get rolled back. And so there is sort of a two-lane thing where they are sort of trying to muddle with this issue while they focus on other things that they know drum up their base.
Yeah, and to your point, this happened at the Roe versus Wade event in Virginia.
Right.
They were talking about abortion, and people, and you were there in the audience. People were saying, "What about reproductive rights in Gaza?"
Of course,
and they derailed the event.
And same with gun control. Like, I hear that from voters I talked to. I talked to one voter who lives in Vermont. He called himself Trump curious, and guns is something he owns guns, he uses guns, and he agrees with Democrats on the issue. But he keeps hearing that argument of, like, Democrats keep saying people have a right to security, but what about people in Gaza? Do they not have a right to security? It constantly is coming up with every issue that's on the ballot.
Yeah, and abortion too. I've heard that argument as well. I do want to talk about the big news of the day, which was that the former president, for the first time in our country's history, was standing in the first criminal trial, opening statements. Dave, I'm curious. I mean, we've seen him come out kind of every day during jury selection and say this is taking him away from the campaign trail. This is a political witch hunt. But how is he balancing all of this, being in the courtroom while also on the campaign? Is it beneficial? Is it hurting him? What can we glean?
I think the news of the indictments definitely helped him, and we saw that in the campaign finance numbers. We saw that. I remember the reaction almost exactly a year ago when he first posted that Alvin Bragg was going to do this. They raised a lot of money that day. Yeah. His then opponents for the nomination all came out and condemned it, except for Nikki Haley at the time. Yeah. And I remember asking some of them about the protests that Trump called for. What's going to happen about these protests that might come outside courthouses? We haven't seen much of that. There have been diminishing returns for him getting people riled up about these. It is part of the atmosphere now for Republican voters, the sense that he is being treated unfairly. So he's not making much money off this, and he's not able to get into the news cycle. I think it does freeze some things that Democrats would love to talk about. They would love to talk about what he says at fundraisers about tax policy, and it doesn't come up because what we're hearing instead are details of the trial and these arguments in the trial that they don't. You've talked to Democrats, people talk to Democrats. Yeah. They don't think this moves people who already have made their minds up about Trump.
Yeah, exactly. It was interesting talking to the Biden White House or the Biden campaign communications director saying, what I asked, he said, well, we're not focused on that. We're focused on this. So it'll be interesting, though, to see the repetition of him being in the courtroom, if that does anything to sway voters one way or the other. Deepa, Dave, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Good. Thanks for your reporting. And from the 2016 presidential campaign to January 6th, how ordinary Americans were swept up in a Maga movement. They're streaming America Decides.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are. Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more. Experience thought-provoking.
Welcome to the idea of being a human being.
Innovative and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
On 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my two good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
At the CBS Evening News, we focus on solutions, finding solutions to healthcare problems, how much money we can spend on groceries, finding solutions to help people understand what are the right choices to make for you and your family.
Welcome back to America Decides. Members of the far-right Proud Boys were seen by Washington Post reporter Isaac Arnsdorf outside former President Trump's rally in Wilmington, North Carolina on Saturday. The rally ended up being canceled for bad weather, but their presence was a sign of some of the extremist and violent individuals who still support the former president. In a newly published book by Arnsdorf, he explores the lasting and potentially dangerous impact Trump has had on the Republican Party. Finish What We Started, the Maga movement's ground war to end democracy, examines the origins, evolution, and future of the Make America Great Again movement. And Isaac joins us now on set. Great to see you. Thank you so much. And congratulations on the book. We both have copies here. So let's start by talking about Saturday. What did you see, and what does this say about the larger movement you've been following for so long?
So it was a group of 10 or 11 men dressed in the uniforms of the Proud Boys. And they were at the entrance. They had a sign. They were calling for the release of everyone charged in connection with the January 6th attack on the Capitol, which is something that Trump himself has called for. I did not see them go inside. Officers on scene told me that they were aware of their presence. But when I asked the campaign, are they welcome here? The answer was, quote, "We don't comment on stupid." the Biden campaign did come out with a statement calling for Trump to disavow them and for criticizing their role as part of Trump's base.
I mean, I think everyone remembers that debate in 2020 where he said, stand back and stand by. But, you know, you've been talking to so many of these people over the course of the reporting from your book. I'm wondering if you could kind of explain to us what that evolution has been, because now it seems to be obviously beyond Trump, but he is now the presumptive Republican nominee.
Yeah, I mean, the book is really not about Proud Boys and Oath Keepers. It's about regular Americans who do not think about themselves as extremists or radicals, but who have gone through a transformation as a lot of ideas that were considered extreme in the past have been sort of mainstreamed and popularized over all the tumult of the past few years and Trump's rhetoric. And so it was a period of studying sort of how that transformation happened and where that leaves us, where that has become the consensus for one of the two major parties.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of fascinating to me, too, because, and you start off by talking about the 2022 midterm election and the losses that Trump had, but then this kind of strategy of sorts that supporters of his had to really kind of get at the most kind of fundamental level of politics.
Yeah, a really underappreciated story of the past few years is how the movement responded to January 6th. So a period actually where Trump was out of power and where and not only out of power, but kind of out of the picture, right? Sort of in hiding in Mar-a-Lago. And the movement was struggling with how to process that. And the answer that they came to, and Steve Bannon had a big role in popularizing this, was that the reason that Trump failed to stay in power on January 6th was because of a few uncooperative members of his own party. And there's actually a lot of truth to that if you think about who stood up to Trump and stopped him. And so the solution for them was to take over the party from the bottom up, from the precinct level to the counties and the districts and the states, and transform the party, purify the party, and then they could prevent that from happening again.
Kind of this precinct strategy, as I think Bannon calls it. Take us forward to a hypothetical in which Trump is president again. What does a second term look like, considering this movement that you've been reporting on?
Trump and the people around him have been very explicit about what they want to do with a second term. And I'm not talking about Trump, whether he's joking or not, when he talks about being a dictator for one day. But it's not a joke, very serious about a more muscular use of federal executive authority, talking about using the Justice Department to punish his critics, maybe invoking the Insurrection Act on the first day of the inauguration in response to any protests, deploying military resources to build detention camps for immigrants. So really not just picking up where he left off in a first term, but pushing much farther, faster.
Yeah, this gives a preview of all of that. Isaac, thank you so much for your reporting. I encourage everybody to check this book out. We appreciate it. Thank you. And coming up, we are on the campaign trail tonight as the vice president takes her reproductive freedom message to the battleground state of Wisconsin. We'll check in with our campaign reporters across the country. You're streaming America Decides.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?
What is the answer then?
Do you know why?
You want me to just keep going?
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Were there death threats?
How is this possible?
What's wrong with that argument?
Are you saying they lied?
Have you told the government that? Why won't you say the word crisis?
You're not answering my question.
Is that scary?
Does that make sense?
What do you mean? What does that mean?
Did any of that make sense?
What's your response?
What happened?
Why?
It's time for the CBS News Original 60 Minutes, Sunday on CBS and streaming on Paramount+.
There is no more room in our city. New York City is receiving record numbers of migrants.
Today, we're going to have more than 500 adult
parents and children come through that door.
Tensions rise as shelters reach max capacity.
We don't have to take care of them.
CBS Reports goes inside a crisis cities and families are facing as they fight to survive.
The United States still has that glimmer of hope for people to come here.
Fighting for a future. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
On Face the Nation, the way to learn is to listen.
We may have a recession.
Listening to how someone explains themselves is so key to understanding their perspective.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Since you started La Soup in 2014, do you have any sense as to how much food you've rescued from the landfill?
We've rescued 4.5 million pounds.
I can't even fathom how much food that is.
And that's one little person in one little city in America.
We're going to call this chicken piccata. We did 450 of these meals today.
This is the exact dish that you and I are going to have.
Yep.
Oh, really good.
Is it good?
Mm-hmm.
Having a plan of how to keep people fed should be in every single city.
So if we eliminated food waste, could we eliminate
hunger? Yes.
Eating Trash, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
When people say who's first to get in the morning, that would be me. Morning news matters because it sets the tone for your day, and it's a way of getting you started.
Day to day, that first draft of history, it happens right here.
We're going to uplift you. We're going to send you out your way.
We take you places, we teach you new things, and we make you feel like, you know, it's not all bad.
People say to me, you always seem to be having a good time. And you know what? You're right.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
From Mickey Mouse to Waterford Crystal to Bitcoin mining, even Seinfeld on Pop-Tarts. The Money Issue, this Sunday morning.
Welcome back to America Decides. Our CBS News campaign reporters are across the country covering key locations on the campaign trail. So let's start in the Midwest, where the vice president is holding a campaign event on abortion rights.
Hi, I'm Nita Cavazos and I'm in La Crosse, Wisconsin. I'm here covering Vice President Kamala Harris's trip. Now, this would be Harris's third trip to this battleground state in just 2024 alone. Now, during her visit to La Crosse, Wisconsin, Harris was here to talk about nursing home care, staffing, and then headed off to a campaign stop focused on abortion rights and overall reproductive rights. Now, it's important to note that Harris's visit to La Crosse, Wisconsin highlights the overall outreach efforts being done by Democrats to make inroads with the more rural and conservative sectors of this battleground state of Wisconsin. Now, it's important to note that in 2020, President Biden did win Wisconsin, but only by a 20,000 vote margin.
I'm Shauna Mizell in Phoenix, Arizona, covering the aftermath of a state Supreme Court decision that determined a near total abortion ban stemming from an 1864 law could go into effect. Now, lawmakers here have struggled repeatedly to repeal this ban, but a group of organizers hoping to put abortion rights on the ballot this November in the state of Arizona say that they've already gathered enough signatures to do so, and they've been using this Supreme Court decision to propel their efforts.
I'm Zach Hudak in York, Pennsylvania. I'm here covering the state's primaries tomorrow, specifically the 10th Congressional District's primary. That is a seat held by Scott Perry, and it's being targeted closely by Democrats in the state. There are 5 of them running for the chance to challenge him tomorrow, and they're painting him as a traitor for his involvement in efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. This is a county, York County, that is often considered Trump country, but that misses a lot of the point. This is a place where just walking around and talking to voters, you find there are a lot of independent thinkers here. I met earlier today with the mayor of this city. He is a Democrat who was actually elected as a Republican. So this is a place where a lot of different things can happen and where Scott Perry tomorrow will be watching to see who he'll face off against come November.
Nydia Cavazos, Shauna Mizell, and Zach Hudak, thank you. Independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is receiving calls to drop out from his former co-workers. Dozens of former colleagues at the Natural Resources Defense Council are urging the ex-environmental lawyer to end his bid for the White House. In an open letter, they said, quote, his dangerous candidacy is only about spreading misinformation and growing his brand. In our new hour-long format, we're often going to take a look back at important events and figures still shaping our politics. 30 years ago today, President Richard Nixon died. The 37th president died after suffering a stroke at the age of 81. While his legacy, of course, is largely connected to the Watergate scandal, here is then President Clinton on April 22, 1994, reflecting on Nixon's accomplishments.
We face today a world of increasing uncertainty and difficult challenges, but it is a world of great opportunity, in no small part because of the vision of Richard Nixon during a particularly difficult period of the Cold War. He understood the threat of communism, but he also had the wisdom to know when it was time to reach out to the Soviet Union and to China.
Nixon's legacy also includes legislation to protect the environment. Under his administration, the National Environmental Policy Act created the EPA in 1970. And that does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The first ever Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now.
Welcome to the Daily Report for April 22nd, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. The preliminaries are over. Donald Trump's criminal trial has started with a clash of opening statements, and even the first witness got in the box Monday. Just one of Trump's former allies turned witness against him.